When the pressures of contemporary existence become overwhelming, and let's admit it, that's often the case, it's intriguing to ponder about which historical eras could have offered a more enjoyable way of life. How about the days of the Old West? Absolutely. Count us in. The uncomplicated nature of life on the frontier, accompanied by a trusty horse as a constant companion, slumbering beneath the stars, preparing meals over an open fire, making occasional trips to town to replenish provisions, perhaps establishing a general store or a quaint saloon. It sounds rather appealing, doesn't it? Yet, as we've seen in cinematic portrayals, the Old West seems to have had its fair share of bloodshed and turbulence, doesn't it? This is where things get intricate. According to the insights from the Smithsonian, a significant portion of these portrayals stemmed from Theodore Roosevelt, who characterized the violence associated with westward expansion as a robust indication of the vigorous strength of the American populace. Quite a statement. Interestingly, the Smithsonian also indicates that this perspective served as both the origin of the lawless West narratives and has recently undergone a bit of a re-evaluation. Life in the West was far more intricate, even in a place like Dodge City, renowned for its lawlessness. The prevailing conditions were mainly shaped by isolated instances of gun violence and a tapestry of legends. That's not to downplay the risks. Undoubtedly, it was hazardous. However, the reasons for potential peril weren't exclusively aligned with the ones depicted in movies. 1. You might die before even making it out west. Before anyone could survive in the American West, they had to get there, and there was a pretty good chance of dying along the way. Britannica estimates that between the 1840s and 1860s alone, there were between 300,000 and 400,000 people who headed west just on the Oregon Trail. Of those, the National Park Service says that 1 in 10 died before they reached the Promised Land. There were an almost shocking number of ways people died, with some of the most common causes being disease, accidents, weather-related tragedies, drowning while crossing the trail's multiple rivers, and, of course, gunshot wounds. Those are just the big ones. There were other risks too. Rattlesnake bites could turn deadly, and at the time, bison were still all over the place. A stampeding herd could quickly and easily overrun a wagon train, and they did. The animals traveling with the convoy were also a major danger. Most traveled with their own herds that included oxen, horses, and mules, and riding accidents weren't the only risk. People were kicked and killed in stampedes, and perhaps the most tragic of these deaths are those who fell off wagons and were either crushed by wheels or other wagons, or dragged along behind. Welcome to the West. 2. Disease was rampant. When Dr. Jim Kornberg put the spotlight on the fastest killer in the Old West for True West magazine, it wasn't a bullet. It was cholera. A bullet, after all, can only kill a very limited number of people, but cholera is the gift that keeps on giving. In 1873 alone, a major cholera epidemic swept through the West, and at this point in history, the medical community understood exactly how it was spread. The bodily fluids expelled were called cholera poison, and in Dr. John Maynard Woodworth's 1,144-page report to Congress, he came to the conclusion that disinfecting everything that could be disinfected was the way to go. Unfortunately, disinfectant was hard to come by in the West, and people kept dying. And that's just one disease. The National Park Service says that measles, scurvy, dysentery, pneumonia, and smallpox were also common. Smallpox, says history, came to the Americas with the Spanish, and once it was there, it, and other European diseases, killed around 90% of native peoples in North and South America. Those people were driven to horrifying extremes, like an incident recounted by historian David Derry. He found a newspaper account from 1878 of an Apache medicine man who, after diagnosing 2 babies with smallpox, placed back-to-back and with a single bullet killed both of them. 3. The cures could be worse than the diseases. Historian David Derry wrote Frontier Medicine, a book that gave a disturbing look into what being a doctor in the Old West meant, both for doctors and their patients. It's grim stuff, says the New York Times, and he found that doctors were largely making things up as they went, prescribed cures that did more damage than the illness or injury, and tragically, white doctors scoffed at a treasure trove of information that could have done some real good. The medicinal knowledge of Native American tribes. There were essentially three options for anyone who was sick or injured, and that involved waiting for a doctor, treating their own problems, or just giving up the ghost. If the doctor showed up, he might perform a bloodletting or administer a weird medicine like the 1815 cure for arthritis and gout. That involved killing a dog, filling the body with things like turpentine, brimstone, and nettles, then roasting it over an open fire, breathe in the fumes, and be cured. It's no wonder many turned to self-medicating for chronic conditions. One of those people was Doc Holliday, forest tenant, doctor of medicine, says that he self-medicated with opium and alcohol when he developed tuberculosis, and while he lived longer than expected, he was also regularly covering up chunks of his lungs. 4. There were lots of murders. Watch literally any Hollywood Western, and it'll quickly become clear that bodies were dropping left and right. Nothing was sacred and no one was safe. But is that accurate? Not really, says Montana State University Professor Emeritus of Economics Terry Anderson. He told Live Science that in spite of the popular depiction of the West as a place where everyone settled disputes with bullets, oftentimes, things were much more civil, but they weren't exactly peaceful either. The Ohio State University's Criminal Justice Research Center did a deep dive into homicide rates in the Old West and found some surprising stuff. Let's take Dodge City during the boom years. Between 1876 and 1885, residents had a 1 in 61 chance of dying a violent death. Their homicide rate was around 165 per 100,000, and while that doesn't sound like much at all, let's put it in perspective. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say that in 2020, the homicide rate was about 7.8 per 100,000, and that it was a huge jump from previous years. Ohio State puts the chances of being murder in Dodge City on the higher end, and even the low end of the scale is comparatively high to today's number. They say that Oregon had the lowest homicide rate at about 30 per 100,000, and the bottom line? Being murdered was a very real and constant fear. 5. Native Americans died in truly astonishing numbers. To talk about the likelihood of dying in the Old West, it's absolutely necessary to talk about the people who did the most of it. Those were, of course, the Native Americans who had been living on the land for generations, long before the Spanish landed and said, "This looks great, we'll take it." Numbers are hard to come by, but history says that it's estimated North America was home to somewhere between 5 and 15 million people when Christopher Columbus sailed up. By the end of the 19th century, there were less than 238,000 left. Just what happened is incredibly complicated and difficult to sum up, but there are some major causes of all those deaths. Smallpox was particularly devastating, with history suggesting it was responsible for a massive death toll. A series of wars, including the Battle of Tippecanoe, the War of 1812, and the Seminole Wars, further decreased numbers, along with outright massacres like the Sand Creek Massacre. Then there were forced relocations like the Trail of Tears. That killed thousands of Native Americans in the 1830s, people who were forced off their ancestral homeland and forced to walk more than 1,000 miles to the land that the United States government decided they could live on. Bottom line, the Native Americans who survived the Old West were the exception, not the norm. 6. Racism and xenophobia led to the deaths of people of Chinese descent. The Library of Congress says that the gold rush brought with it a major influx of immigrants from China. To give an idea of numbers, 20,000 Chinese immigrated to California in 1852, and with them came some serious conflict made worse by the fact that violence was sort of government-sanctioned. Chinese miners were forced to pay $20 a month under a piece of legislation called the Foreign Miners License Law. And if that doesn't sound like much, let's add that's around $675 in today's money, all in order for them to be allowed to do their job. National Geographic says that from the moment they entered the country, Chinese immigrants were subjected to all kinds of abuses and assaults, with incidents like the deadly events of Oxen 24, 1871. That saw one of the largest mass lynchings in United States history, and it targeted Los Angeles's Chinese population. It was just one relatively small part of the 19th century's hatred of Chinese immigrants. And given that the Chinese, Native Americans, and black people were all banned from testifying in court against the white majority, it was an environment where violence went unpunished. 7. The ingredients in your cocktail might kill you. It's no secret that some days are only survived by being able to kick back with a cocktail at the end of them. But in the Old West, even those cocktails could have been deadly. While most Westerns might show cowboys and outlaws alike sidling up to the bar and ordering a whiskey from the town saloon, the Tahoe Daily Tribune found that in addition to locally brewed beers and plain old whiskey, saloons were much more likely to be serving up drinks like the possibly deadly tarantula juice. Drinking it was something that they say often resulted in violence because it contained the deadly and hallucinogenic strychnine. The drink got that chill-inducing name because those who frequently partook in it often complained of the feeling they were covered in crawling spiders. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that only small amounts of strychnine can cause strychnine poisoning and death, so that's fun. It also wasn't the only questionable substance in alcohol either. In many saloons, it was all about stretching liquor as far as they could and raising profits. Legends of America says that meant many saloons were cutting their liquors and serving customers a potentially deadly mix of booze with gunpowder, turpentine, and even ammonia. Drink up.